Okay, let's begin with a little meditation. So sit comfortably with your body relaxed and your mind relaxed. And watch your breathing first of all. And when your mind is somewhat concentrated, bring your attention to your mental consciousness. Withdraw it even further away from your senses. As though to your heart chakra. And with one part of the mind, try to be alert, try to be conscious of what is happening within the rest of the mind. See if you can focus your attention on the space, the quiet between the thoughts. And thereby let the continuity of all the discursive thoughts begin to fade away as you don't feed them, as you don't give attention to them. all the appearances to our mind arise due to our karma. In order to experience pleasure and to avoid negative experiences, in order to avoid suffering, we'll have to abandon the cause of karma. Not just karma, but the cause of it also, klesha. All living beings in this world, other universes, whatever political system, economic system, social system that's set up, until they abandon the causes of suffering, they too will still be immersed in samsara. Identifying with the totality of sentient beings, with identifying with our equality with them, wishing just as we wish to be free of suffering, wishing all of them to be free of suffering, the causes of suffering. We call it, the only way that we can do that is by understanding the nature of the mind, developing our wisdom, our good heart. So for that end, in order to achieve a state in which we've reached our own goal, everlasting blissful happiness, and the goal of all others, the ability to manifest the various form bodies of the Buddha within the realm of Dharmakaya. In order to reach that state, I'm going to participate in the class tonight, listen, contemplate, try to meditate, familiarize my mind with that which is conducive, that I've contemplated, got clear. So to begin with, I'm going to listen to the teachings for that goal, to eventually become enlightened, so that I can eliminate all the suffering, those that I know now, those that I have known in numberless lives in the past. And then relax. Bring your attention back. Present. Thanks for reading there. A big crew now. People are showing up. So, Venerable Sophie is leaving tomorrow for Taiwan, right? Or you're on your way to Taiwan for. So, hopefully you can catch up when you get back. So, we're talking about the 51 mental factors after having differentiated the difference between mind and mental factors. And Steve, do you remember the divisions? How many different divisions there are of the 51? How do we divide the 51 up?
I think there's 5. First one's omnipresent mental factors.
That's good. 5 omnipresent mental factors.
Other than that, I'd have to look down on the sheet in front of me.
Well, what are the ones we're doing now that start with mindfulness and so forth? Aspiration, mindfulness, what are those called?
I wasn't here on Sunday, but would those,
okay, so
those be the virtuous?
No, we just finished the, what are called the object ascertaining mental factors, which were what? Do you remember what they were, Venerable?
Aspiration.
Aspiration. Belief or appreciation.
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
Concentration.
Concentration, samadhi.
And wisdom.
Wisdom. So those are not present in every consciousness, but in many of our mental activities when we understand something. Those are present, object ascertaining mental factors. So that makes 10. Then, what else is there? Then how many virtuous mental factors are there? Do you know? Okay, if you don't know, you're not sure. Karen knows. 10.
Virtuous and 10 non-virtuous.
10 virtuous and 10 non-virtuous. Oh, that's nice. It's symmetric. Is that right? Don, how many virtuous? 11 virtuous mental factors. Okay. And how many root delusions are there? Not 10. 6 root delusions. Actually, sometimes they divide it into 10, but then you don't count them as you won't get 51 mental factors that way. And then 20 secondary delusions and 4 changeable mental states that we'll talk about. So there's 5 omnipresent, 5 object ascertaining, that makes 10. 11 virtues makes 21. 6 root delusions make what, 27? 20 secondary makes 47. And then 4 more. 47 and 4 is what? 51. Okay. So we finished the first 10, the omnipresent and the object ascertaining to some degree, and we've begun the 11 virtuous mental factors, and we've started with faith, and then we just to review a little of that, because I read some from Geshe Rapton's book and didn't read the exact text here after the first part. How many different kinds of faith are there? Do you remember, Lisa?
3.
3? What are the main ones there?
One is clarifying or clarity.
Mm-hmm. Lucid or clarifying faith. Mm-hmm. Then?
Someone else knows the other 2.
You have faith.
I have faith that somebody else.
You have faith that someone else knows the other 2. What is it is it Jim in the back? I forgot. John. Do you remember the other faith? Don't
read them though.
No. I know what you're reading. Who knows? Mark, do you remember the other faith? There's clarifying faith or lucid faith?
Faith of conviction.
Faith of conviction.
Yeah, like faith of wisdom, wisdom faith.
What's the third one called?
Wishing.
Wishing faith. Here's right. That the desires to attain is also another way that it's written in Tibetan. Here it's Ngundu Deva, means strong, a faith of strong desire or manifest desire. So those are very, very famous, and those divisions of faith you find in many, many different texts. So let's just review here what it said. Clarifying faith is on page 33, is a clear mind engendered by seeing the excellent qualities of those so endowed, such as the 3 jewels. left out some words here. So endowed means the excellent qualities of those endowed with excellent qualities. That's what we're translating it, such as the 3 jewels. Why is it called clarifying or lucid? When, for example, when one places a water purifying gem, what's that? One of those kind of filters that I have up in my Brita filter upstairs? What's a water purifying gem? Do you know? It's kind of like that, isn't it? I mean, is it mythological? Is there anything like that?
Like a wish-fulfilling jewel or something.
It's something that maybe doesn't require as incredible, difficult karma to but it's something maybe like that. A water purifying gem is something that when you place in the water, it causes the mud to disappear or to sink and the water to become clear. So that'd be nice to have when you're traveling in Nepal. For example, when one places a water purifying gem in dirty water, the murkiness of the water is immediately cleared away. Similarly, when faith is generated, the murkiness of the mind is cleared away, whereupon all excellent qualities of realization become suitable to arise in one's continuum. So this is kind of the basis to have that kind of clear mind, because when your mind is upset, depressed, feeling bad, jealous, proud, all of the various kinds of kleshas are present. It's very difficult to, at that moment, to develop realizations. You have to really apply some antidotes to get rid of those states. So if your mind can be in a state of faith, lucid faith like this, thinking of the qualities of Buddha that we can achieve and so forth, that can help to allow your mind to be in a state that is suitable to give rise to excellent qualities, good qualities. So the faith of conviction is stronger, something stronger than that. Faith of conviction, the second one, is the gaining of conviction or strong belief through contemplating the modes of dependent arising, cause and effect, cause and result, causes and their results, and so forth, that are taught by the conqueror. So that means causes and results means what? If you plant a seed, flowers will come. What kind of what's meant by causes and results here?
Cause and effect.
Cause and effect. Just like physics, sort of. Pardon?
Dependent arising?
Well, dependent arising is kind of like that also. Here, cause and effect is referring to the inner cause and effect of karma, and karma being the causes and their results, the various kinds of results of karma. So developing the kind of conviction by thinking of those, strong evidence in your mind through many modes of reasoning and years of practice and observation and thinking and analyzing, that kind of faith is something that's very, very strong, that can't be lost as easily. Wishing faith, and these are not necessarily contradictory, these kinds of faith. Wishing faith is, for instance, having contemplated the manner, the mode, or the, how would we say, the mode of the Four Noble Truths, having ascertained true sufferings and true origins as that which is to be abandoned. Remember, in the Four Noble Truths, the first two are those things that are to be abandoned. The second two are those which are to be actualized, right? The first two are the problem, the second two are the solution, you might say. If you're not part of the problem, or if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. What do they say? So the first two, true sufferings, truth of suffering, or true sufferings, and true origins are to be abandoned. So having contemplated the Four Noble Truths and ascertained that fact, that these are to be abandoned, and true cessations and true paths as that which is to be, are those things that are to be attained, objects of attainment, and having understood that these can be attained if one makes the proper effort, the faith thinking, I shall definitely obtain them. So the way that this is phrased, it sounds that wishing faith is something quite sophisticated. So it seems to have some understanding that these things can be attained. It's not just wishing. You know, I wish I could become Buddha. But maybe, for instance, looking at the clear light nature of your mind and recognizing that the delusions can be eliminated, that can be a basis for developing this kind of wishing faith. And Geshe Gyaltsen, the person who wrote this text, the author, says, "Here I have merely identified some illustrations of the three types of faith. It is not that all instances have been exhausted here. I haven't given every kind of example." Now, here there's this statement that we ran across in some of the other texts also. It says, "Nowadays in our world, liking and faith are spoken of as if they were the same thing. Liking beer is said to be faith in beer." Do we say that?
Oh, yeah.
You?
Not me, but people do in the United States.
Do they?
They have faith in beer.
Yeah, right. Those are mainly people in Wisconsin, I think.
Colder areas.
The colder areas. The University of Wisconsin is known for.
Was that like a faith that beer's going to make you happy?
Well, I think sometimes statements like this can be a little bit, when you read some of the Tibetan texts, there are some idiosyncrasies of the language. I don't think in English we use the word faith, this thing that we're calling faith, translating as faith. We don't usually use it for liking, do we? But I think in India and Tibet there is this, at least in the ancient language, there is, at least at some time, because he says nowadays, and this comes up in several of the texts, in our world, these days, liking and faith are spoken of as if they were the same. So let's see if we could just understand what they mean in their context. Liking beer is said to be faith in beer. But liking and faith are nevertheless not the same. Liking is that's a good translation. Gawa, preferring or liking something. Usually, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. As I've run across this over a decade or so, I've never quite sure where this comes from in their own language. Faith is by entity, by its very definition, a virtuous mental factor, whereas liking has both virtuous and non-virtuous instances, right? You can the liking, you can like your guru, you can like Buddha. There are some things that you might like that are non-virtuous. What anything? Karen, did you have things in?
It's like beer, for example.
For example, liking beer. Maybe. Is liking beer non-virtuous?
It's a preference.
Yeah.
Is that
Maybe you call it liking consuming beer.
is that non-virtuous?
I don't know. Could be.
What do you think? What is
It was like attachment.
liking attachment? We know from earlier study, although we'll be talking about it more, that attachment is a mental factor that creates negative karma. If you just like something, does that create negative karma? Not
It
sure.
depends how much you like it.
Really like
Whoa, I really like that. In which case, you mean sort of turns into attachment. You're kind of like, oh, I really like Richard Gere or something. Let's see. If this is explained in detail, there are four possibilities. A possibility which is a case of liking something but not faith, such as is given here, liking one's son, one's wife, and so forth. Here they're giving from the male's point of view, right? So liking a man or whatever, and liking sources of misdeeds, such as drinking alcohol and eating meals after noon when ordained. So, that is to say, just liking drinking alcohol is not necessarily, well, this is a case of liking, right? But not faith. It doesn't necessarily say that these are, it doesn't say that these are negative, but they are sources of misdeeds. What does that mean? That kind of liking can predispose you then to create negative karma. If you have the vow not to drink alcohol, not to eat after midday, then because you have some liking for those things, that can predispose you to that. But those, just the liking itself is not negative. There's a case here of something which is faith but not liking. Fear from the depths of one's heart, and faith of conviction regarding the drawbacks of the sufferings of cyclic existence. So this, knowing that there are drawbacks, is this translation here, what shortcomings, the shortcomings of cyclic existence. Faith in that is not necessarily liking in those things, is it? Liking the shortcomings, liking that everything you're going to have to get old, that your all of the nice smooth skin on your body will be wrinkled, and you will, so forth. You won't be able to enjoy the things that you enjoy now. That you'll eventually have to leave this body and all your friends. Those are things that we don't enjoy, but we can have faith in. Then something which is both faith and liking is when you have faith in something which is enjoyable, such as faith from the depths of one's heart and liking due to contemplating the excellent qualities of a spiritual guide and the benefits of wholesome actions and their results. It's easy, isn't it? And then that which is neither, well, that's easy. That which is neither faith nor liking is something like anger, suffering, and so forth. Is anger itself is just a mental factor, right? It is not the mental factor liking, and is not the mental factor faith. Suffering also is not a mental factor, is it? Is suffering a mental factor?
No, it's the result.
Isn't it a feeling?
Mm-hmm.
But everything's in the mind.
Is suffering, okay, even suffering is in the mind. Is suffering feeling?
I think it's a feeling, but other things as well.
What is feeling? Is feeling, for instance, if I say suffering, physical suffering or mental suffering?
Unpleasant feeling.
Unpleasant feeling. Experience, which is what a feeling is.
Mm-hmm. Is the feeling, is the suffering itself the mental factor?
No.
No,
The mental factor would be attachment.
No, the mental factor feeling. You're talking about.
Oh.
Mental factor feeling is not not
suffering.
attachment, right?
No.
I mean, it might be. If it's a pleasant feeling, it might be coexistent with attachment at the same time when the feeling is there.
Isn't that one of the breakdowns of the mental factor feeling? Pleasant, neutral, unpleasant?
Okay, but what is the mental factor feeling? Is it the suffering or is it the experience of suffering? Or is there a difference?
Experience.
Remember there was this word experience. So you might check when it says here, that which is neither faith nor liking is suffering, anger, suffering. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe you have to analyze whether, if you just say suffering, if you said, there's different kinds of suffering. So does all suffering have to be a feeling?
No, because the aggregates are the nature of suffering.
They're the nature of suffering, right? We say they're true sufferings.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that's one of the things that we come across when we talk about the three kinds of suffering. Suffering of suffering, changeable suffering, and all compounded suffering. Are you familiar with this? Okay. Have you heard this before? I forgot your name back there.
Lindsay?
Lindy, have you heard of the three kinds of suffering? The first kind of suffering we all are familiar with, that which we ripens upon our body and mind as as unpleasant, suffering of suffering. There's another kind of suffering nature that we call changeable suffering that we experience as pleasure, pleasurable feeling. Pleasurable feeling is still said to be the nature of suffering. How could that be? What do you think, Phil? Does it make sense? Pleasurable feeling is if I say to you, you know, it sounds like it's some teenagers arguing with their parents. Yeah, right. Pleasurable feeling is suffering? What are you trying to tell me?
Because it leads to attachment, everything changes, so you lose it.
But isn't, I mean, how could you say that pleasurable feeling is suffering? What's the meaning? Do you know, Diana?
Well, because whatever we experience is pleasurable. If you had too much of it, at some point it would become suffering. Like the example of chocolate cake, I could experience as pleasurable, but if I had so many pieces, it would be suffering.
The chocolate cake would be suffering?
My experience of the chocolate cake would be suffering.
So there is, you can't say that pleasurable feeling is suffering feeling. That's illogical. But you can say that pleasurable feeling is the nature of suffering. That's what's meant by this, when we talk about the changeable suffering. We say that it's, well, you could, if you translated the word dukkha, which we're translating here as suffering, in another way, you could say pleasurable feelings are by their nature unsatisfactory, because that's how dukkha is sometimes translated. Some people would like to translate it that way. Why are they the nature of suffering? Because even at the moment that you're experiencing pleasurable feelings, it's not real pleasure. Remember the example we talked about many times? When you experience something pleasurable, what's actually happening is, maybe we could call it relief. One suffering is going down by coming in contact with something else. Diana's example, the chocolate cake. One suffering which might have actually been engendered by you seeing the cake and sort of desiring it, some kind of thirst for it, is being diminished by your coming in contact with the chocolate cake, which, being a contaminated phenomenon, is going to eventually, we will recognize that as suffering. But when the bigger suffering is going down, we're getting some relief. It's only when the suffering of having eaten several pieces of chocolate cake take place, when the suffering of wanting the cake or desiring it, or the taste for it, or the hunger has been satiated, that we notice the suffering of the cake. Does that make sense, Marcy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
It's like in Matilda.
Was it?
A children's book, Matilda, where a boy has to eat a giant piece of, or giant cake as punishment.
That's really good. Okay. Evan, did you ever have that kind of punishment? Have to eat a big piece of cake. So do you get there's a difference between suffering in general. Suffering can be a nature, and the feeling of suffering. You can't say that pleasurable feeling, contaminated feeling, is suffering feeling. That doesn't make sense. But you can say it's the nature of suffering. That's what's meant when we talk about the First Noble Truth, the truth of suffering. There are these various kinds of suffering. There's the suffering feelings. Then there are contaminated, pleasurable feelings, which the Buddha said are actually also dukkha. They're actually also unsatisfactory, because if they were really pleasurable, if they were real pleasure, the more of that cake you had, bigger piece of cake Matilda, was it? Matilda had, or the more ice cream you had, or whatever, the happier you'd be. This is the insight into this, that this does not bring real happiness, is something that humans can understand. It's difficult for animal realm to understand that. Maybe it's difficult for a lot of us to understand it too. We imagine if we have a nice amount of money in the bank, we have a certain friend, if we have love, if we have our warm house, we'll be happy. But That is what the Buddha called changeable suffering, pleasurable feelings. Okay, so there's a question here, quam. Well then, are liking and respect the same, or are they different? Again, isn't that something that comes up so much in our language? It does come up in some cultures, like in the Tibetan, perhaps in Indian culture. Again, in the world we speak of them as if they were the same, but in fact they're not. Liking a spiritual friend is an instance of faith, but respect for him or her involves contemplating their kindness, knowing shame, that's the next mental factor, and valuing them highly. Hence, when liking and respect arise in the continuum, there are separate mental factors. So why here where it says liking a spiritual friend is faith, but just in the previous section it said liking and faith are different. Didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So does it make a mistake here? It says liking a spiritual friend is faith.
Maybe it's because the power of the object is so strong. So just by the fact that you like, you have, I mean, maybe it's synonymous with the fact that you have faith in their spiritual qualities.
Well, what was the example? The third example up here was something which is both faith and liking. So there is something, when we talked about there's something which is liking but not faith, that which is faith but not liking, that which is both. So this is talking about that example, because in that example, the third one, it says, that which is both faith and liking is, for example, faith from the depths of one's heart, from one's depths, and liking due to contemplating the excellent qualities of the spiritual guide, and so forth. So hence, when if in accordance with how they appear in the great treatises, you analyze these modes in detail with the wisdom of individual investigation, examining the way in which they are generated in the continuum, by turning your mind inwards, then you will get to know them. You cannot know them merely through words. Just talking about the meaning of what faith is. When it's talking about continuum here, what does continuum mean?
Mind?
Means a mental continuum, yeah. Or sometimes the word continuum means the physical and mental continuum. Okay, here it's what faith is generated in the mental continuum. It's not generated in the physical continuum, right? It's a mental factor. So with these meanings in mind, the foremost omniscient one, which is how they in Gelugpa refer to Lama Tsongkhapa, repeatedly advises that in order to perform wholehearted practice, really to be sincere, you have to rely on a skillful spiritual friend and acquire much hearing on the meaning of the scriptures. So in the Lan Rim, one of the first sections is how to rely on a spiritual friend. And something that we don't appreciate that much is well, you do, because you come to listen to the teachings, is the need to accumulate hearing. That is, to hear again and again the teachings. And this is one of the causes, because in hearing the teachings you develop the wisdom of hearing. Remember when we talked about wisdom, there are different kinds of wisdom. So you must rely upon a skillful spiritual friend and acquire much hearing on the meaning of the scriptures. However, nowadays, when these great textual systems are explained to foolish beings like ourselves, who are deprived of the gem of intelligence and are inferior in merit, they become frightened, terrified, and flee far away as though a poisonous snake had sensed the odor of musk. What does that mean? What's the odor of musk indicate to a poisonous snake? What's musk? Maybe this is not translated right. Huh?
It's one of the pheromones, probably.
One of the pheromones?
Man kills cobras or something.
Musk? Is musk a smell? Musk is a smell, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if she's...
Venerable.
I'm not sure if she's translated this correctly.
Wouldn't the snake's predators have that type of smell?
Musk is a scent that a snake exudes when it doesn't like something. So if the snake musks on you, it might bite you shortly thereafter.
Really? I thought musk was what they got from...
The musk comes from musk-type animals like possums or
Skunks, okay. So it's something, isn't it something that is sought, that is an ingredient in some perfumes that's found in the...
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe this is right, I don't know. This is, anyway, we can kind of understand the idea here. The people today, foolish beings, who are deprived of the gem of intelligence and who are inferior in merit, unlike Venerable Sophia, who's always collecting virtuous karma. Okay? People, unlike who don't have the gem of wisdom and don't have a lot of karma, they become frightened, terrified, and flee far away, as though a poisonous snake had sensed the odor of musk, or a little child had caught sight of a whirlpool. Those who viewed the exalted speech of the great scholars and adepts from the lands of the superiors, we say the Arya land means India. Even in Tibet, they use that expression. So there's a lot of respect for India, the land of the superiors, or the land of the Aryas. Those who view the exalted speech of the great scholars and adepts from India as pith instructions seem like stars during the daytime. What does that mean? Stars during the daytime?
Pretty rare.
Pretty rare, right? Here, the function of faith is specified as acting as a support for aspiration. Remember, we went over this quite a bit, right? On the basis of faith, you can develop desire or aspiration for something. And especially when we talk about tranquil abiding, that leads to what? Faith leads to aspiration, that leads to effort. And that leads to, if you achieve tranquil abiding, that leads to pliancy, which is the actual antidote to laziness. So of the different faults, different hindrances to developing tranquil abiding, laziness is the first that has to be overcome, and so you need to develop some faith in that. Also, in anything in the spiritual faith, in the spiritual path, faith is kind of like that which gives you the impetus to make the first step. You know, you have to have faith that the bath is going to be worthwhile to put your foot into it, right? To make the first step. If you don't have hope or faith, you're not going to try. Here, the function of faith is specified as acting as a support of aspiration because, as explained above, the cause of all excellent qualities is effort. We need enthusiastic perseverance. In order to generate effort, one needs the aspiration that seeks. Remember, of these different kinds of, faith, there's one kind of faith that's seeking also, but you need the aspiration which is seeking something. In order to generate aspiration, one needs to see the excellent qualities as well as possess the faith of conviction. To see the excellent qualities would be which kind of faith? Kind of implies a clarifying faith, right? The lucid faith. Why is it called clarifying or lucid? When this faith is generated, the murkiness of the mind is cleared away, whereupon all excellent qualities of realization become suitable to arise in one's continuum by seeing the excellent qualities of those endowed with excellent qualities. So, in order to generate aspiration, one needs to see the excellent qualities of the objects of faith and to possess conviction in them. For this reason, faith is praised more than once as the foundation. You think it's just more than once? Twice? It means a lot, right? As the foundation of all virtuous qualities in the scriptures and their commentaries. In this vein, in the same way, a text called the Blaze of Jewels Dharani, Ratna Loka Dharani, she translates formula of the three jewels blazed. Dharani is not necessarily a formula, but anyway, this text says, faith is the forerunner and, like a mother, is the procreator. It guards and increases all excellent qualities. It dispels doubts and frees you from the four great rivers. Faith signifies the city of happiness and goodness. The four great rivers, generally we say, there's, as it's mentioned here in the footnote, there are different ways of talking about it. Usually we talk about ignorance, views, existence, and craving as the four rivers, it says here, from the point of view of cause. There is a note in the Nyungne text, in the prayer at the end, that Lama Soquel Rinpoche translated, and I helped to translate. We can take a look on that. It also, in that, it refers to the four rivers, and there's a note about these four. Also, from the resultant point of view, the four rivers are called birth, aging, sickness, and death. But usually, ignorance, view, existence, and craving. So faith is without murkiness and clarifies the mind. It abandons pride and is the root of respect. Faith is a jewel, a treasure, and the best of feet. Like hands, it is the root of gathering virtue. So if you have faith, just having faith in the mind, if you can generate faith when you feel otherwise disturbed, that can clarify the mind and actually create a state of virtue in your mind and predispose your mind to creating other good qualities. So when you feel bereft of any kind of virtuous state, try faith. See if you can generate faith. And if someone just says to you, when they just say, oh, be patient, or don't be angry, or have faith, that's sometimes difficult to do, right? If you don't know what that means. So, when you're angry, someone says, oh, just be patient. The anger is already there. So if you're in a state which is opposite to faith, then you have to actually apply the antidotes and recall reasons for generating faith. And see if you can either coming in contact with spiritual friends, or that's why the great monasteries and spiritual structures and so forth are of great value, because even their presence can help to generate awe in the mind. You know what awe is? Not awe. Awe, shucks. Okay, the 10 Teachings Sutra, the 10 Dharma Sutra, Dasha Dharmaka Sutra, says, faith is the best of vehicles through which you will be guided and definitely emerge. Therefore, intelligent people rely on following faith. Wholesome qualities do not grow in people who have no faith, just as green sprouts do not grow from seeds scorched by fire. So I think sometimes academics, I've met some academics over the years when I was in India and other places, from Germany and Holland and other places. They were Buddhist scholars, Buddhist academics, and they were a little bit hurt that this respect was being paid to the monks or the Sangha or other so-called practitioners, because they felt they also knew about Buddhism. But oftentimes what they're lacking is faith, because they may know a lot about these things, but they may not put it into practice. Without faith, you're not going to generate effort, right? You're not going to generate aspiration, desire to achieve these goals. So just knowing things is not enough. You need to have this as the basis. So that's perhaps one of the reasons why faith is mentioned first here. Thus, all wholesome qualities are companions of faith. Shantideva's Siksha Samuchaya. You know what the Siksha Samuchaya is? We talked about that before. You know what the Bodhisattva Charyavatara is? So Siksha Samuchaya was another text composed by Shantideva, that gave the sources of the material that he was explaining in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, taught a couple of years ago. He taught over 2 years in Bodh Gaya, the Siksha Samachaya. So, compendium of trainings. So it kind of gives a lot of quotations from the sutras and explanation about them, and then you can, that is a basis, a very good companion to studying the Bodhisattva Charyavatara if you'd like to, if you have the opportunity to study them. It states that the Siksha Samachaya, Shiksha, I think it should be Shiksha Samachaya, Shiksha means training. Having made firm the root of faith, where it just states that, having made firm the root of faith, also teaches that faith is the root of all paths. So all the different mental paths that lead to higher spiritual goals, the root of them is faith. And so in the Lam Rim, we always talk about training in root faith. Usually that refers to faith in the spiritual guide, but it also means faith in these other things. Even the great being, the protector Nagarjuna, emphatically taught that faith is the foundation of all paths. With these meanings in mind, the foremost omniscient one made the statement, training in faith, the root. One of the outlines in his Lam Rim Chemo, the great exposition of the paths, and he stated that the root of all happiness and goodness is the faith of conviction. So, this is the first of the mental factors. Now, last time we also talked a little bit about the next two, shame and embarrassment. We're going to go a little bit over that again. Shame and embarrassment, they're not necessarily things that we think of in the Western context, do they? Has it come up in, maybe it comes up in some other religions, that you need to have a sense of shame and embarrassment. Is this the same as conscience from the definition? What do we mean by conscience? Has anyone a sense of that? Do you know, Lisa?
I think from a Catholic perspective, it's knowing the difference between right and wrong.
My conscience. How do we use that word, conscience? My conscience told me, or my conscience... What?
It's bothering me.
My conscience is bothering me.
Right.
It's sort of like some guys consider their wives as their conscience or something. Not because their wives bother them, but they keep them on the straight and narrow, right? Someone reminds them of how things should be. So it's almost as though that's a mental factor. We might recognize it as a mental factor in the mind that is aware. Maybe it coming later, maybe it's more like conscientiousness, Bhakya. But shame and embarrassment, Nagarjuna mentioned in his letter to the king, talked about these things, and in other texts, I think, that for a layperson, these are some of the most important mental factors to try to generate. So shame, what is shame? It's the avoidance of misdeeds on account of oneself. It has the function of acting as a support of effective restraint from misconduct. And embarrassment is a similar thing. It's avoidance of misdeeds on account of others. But we have to see the discussion here. It says, what's the difference between shame and embarrassment? Although both of them are similar in terms of avoiding misconduct, shame is such that when one is about to engage in misconduct, one avoids it thinking, this is not something I should do. I would be ashamed. Taking oneself as the cause. So there could be various reasons for that that are virtuous. It might just be, this is not something I should do. I'm a monk. You know, I am a Tibetan Buddhist, or I'm a practitioner. I'm a Vajrayana practitioner, whatever. I shouldn't be doing this. Or it could be thinking in terms of the karmic consequences upon oneself. I shouldn't do this because oh boy, I'll suffer in the future. Or you can take yourself as a reason, thinking, I shouldn't do this because this is harming others, and this is not taking others as a reason. I wouldn't like to experience this. Kind of like in terms of the equality with others. I know I wouldn't like to hear these harsh words I'm about to deposit on someone else's lawn. Okay? So remember the question, I sort of raised a question for you last time, is if you thought, I'm not going to do this negative action, what was the example I gave? Remember?
Something about receiving offerings.
Yeah, say because they won't make offerings to me. I won't be famous, and so forth. Would that be considered this mental factor? Did you come to any conclusion on that?
I don't know if that would be virtuous.
What do you think, Brish? Why not? Isn't it the avoidance, thinking, I'm not going to kill this, say your benefactor's there, or say Venerable Sophia's brought the very rich Chinese benefactors, and you would say, I'm not going to cook these oysters, or I'm not going to kill these lobsters because they may not give us big offerings. Something like that. Wouldn't that be virtuous?
It wouldn't be virtuous because necessarily shame is a virtuous state of mind.
Right.
And
but why wouldn't that be shame?
because the motivation is not virtuous.
Because it's, yeah, and how can you determine that? Because usually in the Lan Rim we say actions that take as their motivation the happiness of this life alone don't become virtuous, right? You need at least a certain separation to think about the happiness of future lifetimes or the happiness of others and so forth. Things that are, if your main motivation is the happiness of the here and now, it's almost impossible for that to become virtuous. So I agree with you that not everything, when you're avoiding a non-virtue on account of yourself, not all of it falls into this mental factor. Let's see, Geshe Reptance. So he calls it here self-respect, this first one. It's a distinct mental factor that avoids evil for reasons of personal conscience. This is on page 126. It has the function of restraining harmful conduct of body, speech, and mind, and is the basis for all moral disciplines. So examples of self-respect would be, we might be about to cause harm to another being, but on considering that we would dislike such harm to befall us, we withdraw from action. So that would be a virtuous action, right? So that would be this avoiding the negative action, taking ourself as the reason. Not just compassion for the other person, but part of that, it's sort of a cause of compassion for the other person. Similar. We withdraw, similarly, we might be on the verge of committing an action, but then we recollect it is not fitting action for someone who's supposed to be practicing Dharma. Hence, we would restrain ourselves from doing it. This would require you having a sense that a Dharma practitioner is, it depends on how you would be thinking about that. For instance, if you thought a Dharma practitioner is someone who will be profiting in their future lives and so forth, and this is not the way that someone who is a Dharma practitioner should be acting, that might be a reason for that. Hence, we restrain ourselves from doing it. Whilst riding a horse, it is very important to keep steady hold on the reins in order to prevent the horse from getting out of control. Likewise, without a sense of self-respect, our conduct is liable to become chaotic and unrestrained, thus leading us into conflict and suffering. So Geshe here mentions, although our text doesn't, two kinds of self-respect: the avoidance of evil for the sake of oneself and the avoidance of evil for the sake of one's spiritual tradition. So let's take a little break. So we had some good thoughts about this. What was the example, Don? Could you give the example that you were thinking of?
For the embarrassment one?
Yeah.
Yeah, with George's example of the frying the oysters with the motivation, not to fry the oysters with the motivation to get an offering.
Sorry.
And to make it virtuous, it really had to cross over into not just verbally gain, but say in other lives. To make it a virtuous act, you had to be thinking about the future lives. In embarrassment, my question was, since that's, I might be embarrassed if I do something and George sees it, isn't that just concerned with this worldly situation, and is it virtuous then?
It could be. It depends on how you consider the person. Like, say, our spiritual friends, if we know that they're intent on virtue and there's kind of supports to they're like our conscience. You know, they're kind of like supports of our spiritual practice. Then that can be embarrassment or consideration for others. But if you're just concerned about your reputation with them now, the gang, oh, they'll think I'm a jerk, you know, a doofus, then that would not be this virtuous mental factor. You know, you would have been avoiding non-virtue, but and it would be kind of a mixed karma. You'd be creating some virtue by avoiding non-virtue, but not very much, because the motivation wouldn't be to avoid the non-virtue so much as to avoid the lack of respect of your peers or the present or something like that. So I think you have to sort of think about that one a little bit.
Well, you know, he uses consideration for others.
Consideration for others is instead of embarrassment, and maybe it makes it a little more clear, right?
Rather saying it's embarrassing, he says, cause disappointment or suffering in others.
Mm-hmm.
So them seeing me do that, disappointing them.
Right.
So you could turn that into
So you could disappoint your buddies or your wife. You know, that might not be the same. Let's see here. Oh, so we finished that. Consideration for others is a distinct mental factor that avoids evil for the sake of others. So that's what we're calling embarrassment in this text. You can call it consideration for others, as long as one is called self-respect or shame, motsa shepa, and the other is consideration for others or embarrassment. There are even other translations that are used by other authors. Let's see, did I write down in the original translation of this, John Donne, I didn't write down what he had written for this. Here, Ishiratha's text says, consideration for others is a distinct mental factor that avoids evil for the sake of others. It has the function of restraining harmful conduct of body, speech, and mind, acting as a basis for maintaining the purity of one's moral discipline. Consideration for others. So that's the thing that Don was talking about, not disappointing the gurus and so forth. Preventing a lack of faith occurring in others, that can also be a reason why you would avoid certain non-virtuous actions, because others might develop a lack of faith then, thereby acting as a cause for joy to arise in their minds. This mental factor is very similar in nature to self-respect or shame, except that it restrains one from evil through considering that were one to commit a particular action, it would cause the disappointment or suffering, for others. In general, self-respect and consideration for others are the determining factors whereby people in this world are regarded as being noble or not, isn't it? If they have this sense of self-respect or shame, they avoid things on account of the negative consequences for themselves. They avoid negative things. And they avoid negative things on the basis of the ramifications for others. So what about compassionate mind? Would that be more leaning toward, both of these might be present, but say a sense of compassion for others, and you would not harm them for that reason, would that be more also simultaneous with self-respect or consideration for others?
Consideration.
A little more consideration for others, right? If you're thinking about the karmic consequences for yourself, that would be more taking shame as the basis for restraining from non-virtue. So, yeah, noble beings. They are like a vessel, these two mental factors, that contain all divine and human virtues, as well as a strong fence that guards them, guards the virtues. Nagarjuna once said that there are two things that protect people in the world: self-respect and consideration for others. So these are very important mental factors that we might not ordinarily think about, and by cultivating them and trying to enhance them in our continuum, we can keep our mind in a virtuous state. Is it possible for the mind to be virtuous and non-virtuous at the same time? By nature, I'm just talking, of course, by the, you might have a virtuous mental factor before a statue of the Buddha and be creating mixed karma, because by the power of the object you would be creating some virtue, but the entity of the mind I'm talking about, can the mind be both virtuous and non-virtuous? Can you have a virtuous mental factor and a non-virtuous mental factor present?
Not at the same time.
Why not?
It's not enough RAM.
Not enough hard drives. Yeah, not enough RAM, I think it is. Hard drives. Yeah, maybe. What do you think?
They have a little bit different substance.
Remember when we talked about the 5 similarities? So you go back, check there. There's something when we talk. In general, if the mind is virtuous, a non-virtuous mental factor cannot be present. Of course, it can change because of distraction. Even if you keep your mind in a state of faith or consideration for others, because it's not as it remains that way forever, right? Because of your mind becoming distracted or sinking or whatever, then other mental states can arise. A non-virtue can replace that. But while the virtue is present, non-virtue can't stick its ugly nose in there. So when we talk about anger, for instance, if your mind is meditating on loving, on the state of love or compassion, it's impossible, because that's a virtuous mental state, it's impossible for anger to be present. Not only is it impossible for anger or even attachment to be present at that time, but in particular, it acts as an antidote to anger, say loving compassion, so that even if your mind is distracted, because it's been in that state, it predisposes you from easily becoming angry again. So these are very important mental factors: faith, shame, and consideration for others. I'll sort of mix the names here. There are 2 aspects to consideration for others also in Geshe Rabden's text, as he did for shame or for self-respect. The avoiding of evil for the sake of other beings, and the avoidance of evil for the sake of spiritual traditions of others. Okay, let's go on. Now, the next 3, so how many have we done? We've done 3, right? 3 of the 11 virtuous factors. The next 3 are called the 3 roots of virtue.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
a quick question? He's using the word evil often.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Can you give a sentence where the
Consideration for others is a distinct mental factor that avoids evil for the sake of others. And then it's used a few times.
Okay.
Does that basically mean non-virtuous actions?
Yeah, there are different words, so probably that's a translation of the Tibetan word dikpa, which is not exactly non-virtue, but is it's like what we might translate as sin. Like, I think it's, what is it in Sanskrit, papa, as opposed to punya. Papa kind of means negativity or evil.
Wrongdoing?
It could be wrongdoing. You might translate it that way. It doesn't necessarily, sin almost in our, if we translate dikpa as sin, then almost kind of, becomes charged with some kind of meaning from our own Judeo-Christian tradition, isn't it? So it might be, at this time when we have all sorts of idea, oh, sin. We have some kind of mental projection what that means to us already, that like the word really has some inherent existence. Might be better to use a different word like evil or something like
Evil
that.
sounds even worse. Though.
Evil sounds even worse?
Evil doer.
Like evil is like someone who's evil, someone who loves causing harm, who enjoys causing harm. You know, it's like,
They are, yeah. So yeah, so you think that just if we do something bad, that's not necessarily evil.
right.
Yes, this evil might sound a bit heavy. Negativity, how about that?
Sounds better.
Okay. So the next three are called the three roots of virtue. What are the three roots of non-virtue?
Attachment, anger, and
Attachment, hatred, and
ignorance.
yeah, the three poisonous minds. Usually, when we talk about the three poisonous minds, attachment is used for both. When we talk about the three poisonous minds, we talk about attachment, hatred, and here's translated bewilderment. What did she translate it? Oh, she's a non-ignorance. Timug mepa. I think in Sanskrit it's moha. So, but on other occasions, when we talk about the six root delusions, we talk about attachment, anger, and ignorance, right? When we talk about the three poisonous minds, we don't talk about attachment, anger, and ignorance. We talk about attachment, hatred, and bewilderment, or yeah, kind of like delusion or something like that, moha, or bewilderment, or a little bit. They're not exactly the same. Hatred is not exactly the same as anger. We'll talk about anger when we talk about the six root delusions. Do you know which is stronger, hatred or anger?
Hatred.
It sounds like hatred is. His Holiness has said sometimes in our minds there might be moments of anger, but hatred kind of indicates some kind of long-term kind of solidification, right? Something stronger than anger. It's not considered one of the secondary mental factors. It's just like perhaps a stronger version of anger. But here, the three roots of virtue are called non-attachment, or in Geshe Repton's book, I think quite skillfully called detachment, non-hatred, shedangmepa, it's not non-anger, and Sikhi translates non-ignorance, maybe and the other text calls it non-bewilderment, because it's not the word ignorance, it's the Tibetan word timuk. Usual word for ignorance in Tibetan is what? Marikpa, like Dorje Marikpa, right? So your nickname is also Timuk.
Okay.
Okay. Timuk Moha.
Dorje Timuk.
Dorje Timuk or Vajra Moha. Mohani. So these three are kind of interesting because if we say non-attachment, you might think, well, right now I'm kind of satisfied. I have a state of non-attachment. Is that a virtuous state? You know, just like, yeah, I had enough to eat. I don't have any, I'm non-attached. I don't have any attachment. That's not the meaning of non-attachment here. These three all are antidotes to the respective states. They're actually virtuous states of mind, not just the absence. Like right now you might not be angry or you might not have hatred manifest in your mind, but that doesn't mean that you have non-hatred, the mental factor non-hatred. Okay.
Could you say that again?
You were laughing too much. Sorry.
It's just that I do that. I think that way.
These three, they all have, in this translation, they all have non first, like non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, or non-bewilderment. That doesn't indicate that there's simply the lack of those states.
Okay.
These are actually antidotes to those states. So that's why the first one, non-attachment, maybe you could call it detachment, because detachment, in English, does that have kind of like the flavor of not just being not attached, but detached, like, you know. This is a good one for you. This is a good one for you. Wait, Mary. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. Okay. So here they translate detachment, non-hatred, and non-bewilderment. So let's see. Non-attachment. Regarding non-attachment, the Abhidhamma Samachaya, the Compendium of Knowledge, says, what is non-attachment? It is the lack of attachment to cyclic existence and the articles of existence, cyclic existence. It has the function of acting as a support for non-engagement in misconduct. So we have to look more clearly, because at first glance it says the lack of attachment. We might just think if attachment is not present, we have this mental factor, and because it's a virtuous mental factor, you might think whenever attachment is not present, you're in a virtuous state of mind, but that's not the case necessarily. Geshe Rapton's explanation of that one, detachment, well, it's hard to say because a lot depends on the translation. This is translated by Gonzo Rinpoche and Steve Batchelor. Detachment is a distinct mental factor that, when referring to an object within conditioned existence, okay, what they're just calling cyclic existence here, acts as the actual remedy for attachment toward it. So when you refer to something, what is this thing called?
Not quite sure.
Not quite sure what that thing is. It's not a marshmallow. I think it's some kind of almond thing, is it? Or I don't know. Could be. I could have bewilderment about it. But say, if in referring to this, attachment rises, the mental factor that causes me to disengage from that by thinking, actually, that's the nature of suffering. Even if I had that, I wouldn't be happy. 2 hours after eating it, it's already turned into excrement. Whatever. If it's not really so pure as I think. All of those various kinds of reasons can act as aids to developing non-attachment or detachment to that. Knowing its impermanence. That the attractive physical form that might be alluring us. Being removed from the object, causing us to be separated from the object, it remains detached and one does not grasp for it. It has the function of preventing attachment and increasing the remedy for attachment. It has the function of preventing attachment and increasing the remedy or the antidote of attachment. It is the antidote to attachment. So here we have to, there's more discussion on page 38. First, there's a very brief discussion in Geshe Gelson's text of the three, and then later in the discussion of the three, it will go into these a little bit more. But let's just go through them again here. Attachment is the tendency of the mind that desires to possess a particular object, right? Whether it be animate or inanimate. For as long as we allow ourselves to be subjected to its demands, we shall only obtain disappointment and suffering, never the satisfaction we seek. Isn't attachment our friend? Isn't that what gets us what we want? What do you think? Is it Libby? Lindy. Isn't attachment, if we didn't have attachment, we wouldn't go out to see, what was it, Matrix Revolution? Or we wouldn't have gone to, we wouldn't go on Fabrizio's ice cream store will open on New Year's Eve during Gelatomania. So we wouldn't go out to, without attachment, maybe would be respect, would it be shame or embarrassment? No. Maybe it would be consideration for others or something. We'd go there to make him feel good or something like that. Compassion. But isn't attachment good?
It's impermanent.
Attachment's impermanent, okay. Attachment's impermanent, but isn't attachment good? Why should it be something we avoid? Isn't it our friend? isn't the rising of attachment what causes us to get that which is pleasing for us? You're attached to some friend. Because of that attachment, you do things for them, and then you become better friends, and then you stay together. It's like the Karen. You have much experience of this. It's like, isn't it like the glue that keeps the relationship together? Attachment. Why should non-attachment be? Right? This is an easy question, but everyone seems to be dumbstruck. What do you think, Steve? Attachment.
Well, I think
we haven't talked
attachment
exactly
is the impermanence of everything in life, but there is some case for a type of attachment in the sense that if we were, say, crossing a river in a boat, and we wanted to make that journey, we would have to maintain the boat while we were on the journey.
Mm-hmm. Would that be necessarily attachment? We have to check. Attachment is we haven't talked, it's one of the non-virtuous mental factors. This is the antidote to it.
Isn't it kind of like the glue that keeps you in this sort of cyclic existence?
Yeah, we might think of it as the glue that keeps the relationship together. So I don't want to, in fact, often we're happy when someone else has attachment for us, isn't it? They're like, they like me. They're really attached to me. I mean, maybe sometimes it becomes a burden. Maybe you've noticed after a while, right? Like molasses, right? But at a certain point, it might seem satisfying when we for our self-esteem. But it is what keeps us stuck in cyclic existence. Attachment by its nature is a state of mind which causes the mind to be unclear. It's what's called a klesha, a delusion, attachment. We'll talk about it in detail later. It has the tendency of observing something which is attractive or pleasant, which that in itself is no problem. And on the basis of having observed that, wants to obtain or wants to avoid losing, if you already have, wants to attain it, wants to avoid losing. And because of superimposing upon the other object qualities that it doesn't really have. If, for instance, you didn't want to be separated from the holy guru for good reasons because they're a spiritual guide, that wouldn't necessarily be attachment. It could turn into attachment if you exaggerated the qualities. But, with respect to this cookie, whatever this is called, or, with respect to some beautiful person, exaggerating the qualities of them or anticipating some kind of pleasure that they might engender for us clouds the mind and prevents us from seeing how that can change, how it's not really the nature of pleasure and so forth. So detachment, this mental factor, is an antidote to that. It's a mental state that sees things more clearly and acts. This is not necessarily an exact manifestation of wisdom, but it is a mental state, a mental factor that acts as an antidote to attachment.
Question?
Yeah.
So, if you are attached to, so you were saying attachment to a guru or something like that, if what it is that you are attaching to is something that you are seeing clearly or with wisdom or without the intellectual manifestations that you might put on it, then is that still a negative?
If it's what we're defined as attachment is a state of mind that perceives something which we find attractive in some way, pleasant, and it superimposes upon that qualities that it doesn't really have, and on the basis of that, it exacerbates, it increases our desire for that, wanting to get it or wanting to avoid from losing it. That's what's called attachment. It causes the mind to be unclear. If we're not exaggerating the qualities of something, if in referring to our companions
and the good, the help we give them and they give us, and how we're beneficial for them and they're beneficial for us. That can be, that doesn't have to be, that bond that keeps us together, the friendship, the love, doesn't have to be attachment. But oftentimes our sense of love is very much mixed with attachment. I've mentioned this before. It's often the case that in the West, when we say, I love you, it's kind of an expression of liking. Like I love peanut butter, or I love pizza, or something like that. You know, you please me. We want the other person to know, so that if we please them by chance, then we can form some kind of you know, it's not just that I'm going to be attached to them, they can be attached to me too, so we can kind of circle around one another. That kind of relationship is, if that's the basis for our relationship, if our relationship is based on attachment, then when the other person doesn't please us any longer, we'll say, I'm sorry, I don't love you anymore. You know, you don't. You know, you're no longer young and firm. You know, you've begun to sag. I'm trading you in for a new model. Is that in social relations? That's often what people talk about when certain relationships end up, right? Or we find pleasure in someone else, or something like that. Real sense of love isn't based on attachment. That's not the glue that keeps a relationship together. From a Buddhist perspective, real loving relationship, the glue, so to speak, that keeps it together is our affection for the other person, wanting them to be happy. Not so much wanting us to be happy. If it's like all said, I love you, John, because when I'm with you, I feel good, I feel, you know, kind of nice, and, you know, and then anticipation of other things or whatever. That kind of sense of love is self-centered, egoistic, but a sense of love of loving the other person, wanting that, you know, I love you, I want you to be happy. Then if the other person changes, still you continue to love them. Might be also a challenge still, but that has more chance of the glue, a nice glue, Dharma glue, that keeps the relationships together rather than based on attachment. So the more we can develop, what would it sound like when we say, the more you can develop detachment for your loved ones? Does that sound too cold?
Yeah.
That sounds too cold. So we find another word.
Non-attachment.
Non-attachment. The more we can feel non-attachment for them, as an antidote for attachment. So when attachment, which is that exaggerated thing that they're bringing me pleasure because of seeing them as attractive, exaggerating their qualities and wanting to keep them for my own benefit because they're pleasurable for me, the more we can eliminate that from the mind, the more our relationships can be authentic. So the text here continues, for as long as we allow ourselves to be subjected to the demands of attachment, we shall only obtain disappointment and suffering, never the satisfaction that we seek. Thus, detachment is the opposite of attachment. It withdraws us from a compulsive involvement with the object. Compulsive. What was the one with Glenn Close? Would she play with Glenn Close? What was it? Fatal Attraction. Kind of like. That's kind of like. That was attachment, right? You remember that one?
Just a little bit.
Did you see that one? Did you? Did you see Marcy? Scary, huh? There was also one I saw on TV once. There was something about the hand that rocks the cradle. Was that the one? About it was a very nice actress who played a nanny, and she was so attached to the husband and the idea of the family, she was just completely. Do you remember that one? Very scary. It's a good Dharma movie for a Thursday night Dharma class. Thereby, it eliminates the grasping and clinging to possess, the mental factor detachment. Being under the influence of attachment, we find ourselves driven here and there in the pursuit of transient pleasures lacking any real value. With detachment, though, we are enabled to see more clearly and objectively and thereby focus our attention and energy on the accomplishment of truly worthwhile aims. So it takes some time to really see the shortcomings of attachment and to cultivate this mental factor. This is not something that maybe the modern world has a lot of. Not sure. In fact, our modern world, the whole enterprise of what's it called? Publicity, advertising. Is that the right word? The advertising industry. It's kind of to overcome any non-attachment, try to develop our attachment. You have to have that new thing, right?
The new DVD.
New DVD.
George's new DVD.
G5, dual. With Firewire 800.
Somebody take his temperature.
Good. So the next root of virtue is called non-hatred. And although it has a negative particle, it says shedang actually is in your text. You see shedang meba. Shedang actually means hatred. Shedang meba just means without hatred, literally, or non-hatred. But it doesn't mean just the lack of hatred. It's actually the antidote to hatred. What is non-hatred? It is the lack of malice with regard to sentient beings, the lack of malice with regard to suffering and the sources of suffering. It has the function of acting as a support for non-engagement in misconduct. As has been said above, it is a knower, consciousness, that conquers the generation of hatred within observation of any of the three objects that generate hatred, and is a lack of malice. So we'll talk about these three objects in a second.
Venerable?
Yes.
Does that mean that these three virtuous mental factors can only be present in relation to non-virtuous mental factors without dependence on first generating non-virtuous mental factors of attachment?
So you have to generate attachment first in order to have non-attachment.
Well, that's what it seems like, because
no, I think if you, for instance, you've experienced over time that your attraction to something and your attachment to it cause problem, and you've generated through effort, or maybe in past lifetimes. Some people will have, remember when we talked about wisdom, there can be an innate wisdom, wisdom of hearing, contemplation of wisdom. Similarly, some of these virtuous mental factors will be innate in our mind if we've cultivated them in past lifetimes. So there might be a certain sense of detachment, not a non-interest in things, not necessarily at first so clearly delineated in our mind what the reason is, because of having used reasons in past lifetimes, already being predisposed to not falling for them, not being attracted to them, even though they appear to be attractive and pleasing. Like say, for instance, we might have to, with someone who's stolen our silverware or something like this, you know. At first we might have to use reasons to understand that they're an enemy. Later, we won't have trust in them, even without recalling that particular occurrence. There might be a continuum of lack of trust in that.
Would it be fair to say then that these virtuous states would only, since you said they're not present all the time, that they're antidotes, that they would only be manifest when the objects, the potential objects of anger and attachment and bewilderment arise, and we use it as an antidote then, without first?
I think if you in certain virtuous states of mind, even if there aren't attractive objects around, this mental factor can be present. It doesn't have to be only observing an attractive thing. It is a state of mind which is an antidote to that. So if when you are in a virtuous state of mind, because we'll see later, these virtuous states of mind are not like the difference between virtue and non-virtue, that one can't be present when the other is present. You can have several of these virtuous states of mind at the same time. They can be present. And in certain, let's say for instance, in a state of mind in which you have a deep appreciation for the law of cause and effect, complementary with the emptiness of phenomena. Phenomena are empty, and that yet still the appearances that we have arise because of cause and effect. That in itself, I think, could be manifesting non-attachment. It can be an antidote to attachment right there. You can manifest the different flavors of this. It's not just one particular mind.
Gotcha.
Non-hatred. Let's see. Okay, so non-hatred here. Non-hatred is a distinct mental factor that, when referring to one of the three specific objects, bears the characteristic of loving kindness. So it is of the nature of loving kindness, this state of mind. Later we'll see another one called non-harmfulness, which is the nature of compassion. So in a sense, this is similar to loving kindness. Bears the characteristic nature of loving kindness, which directly overcomes hatred. It has the function of acting as the basis for the prevention of hatred and for the increase of love and patient acceptance. So these three objects that are talked about here, that are the referent objects of hatred. What are they? Someone who is actually afflicting harm upon us, we can be angry at them, right? Who's doing that? Like when the thief at night, or the thug or something, you know, or someone who has got a gun and stopped you on the street or a knife or something. We could be angry at the person. We can be angry or have hatred for the harm itself. We can dislike that very much. Or we can be angry or develop hatred for the cause or instrument of the harm. Thorns, poisons, weapons, or the gun, or the car that's crashed into our car, or whatever. Upon recognizing one of these three things as the cause of our suffering, we tend to dislike the thing and subsequently become angry toward it. This anger immediately causes agitation and tension in the mind that leads only to irrational and uncontrolled behavior. So sometimes also in classes we say, isn't anger can be good. Some people think, especially people from New York for some reason. I know that, hope if you're watching this in New York, excuse me, we're in California right now, so we tease you on the East Coast. You could probably say, the West Coast, they think attachment is good, right? And California. Yeah. I'll tell a California joke for the East Coast, having offended you. You know how California is like granola? You take out all the flakes, the fruits, and the nuts, and there's nothing left. That's for the sake of the East Coast. So sometimes people think anger is their ally, because without anger, the world will just step over them. They need, just a weak little person. If I don't have some anger and show my stripes, so to speak, or my spots. Is that
Hood spot.
Hood spots, right. That's right. If I don't show my hood spot, others will take advantage of me. But there's a difference between being vigilant and decisive and being angry. Anger is a state of mind in which you have experienced something which is uncomfortable as opposed to comfortable in attachment. You've exaggerated the faults of that to such an extent that the mind now has lost its clarity. And there is an inherent clarity all the time. But because of the shaking of the mind, you no longer can really decide the correct thing to do. And you are ready to strike out, either physically or verbally, or if you can't, or if you decide to wait, what's it called? What's the famous thing? Something is best served cold. What did I say? Revenge. Was it?
Revenge.
Revenge is a dish best served cold, or something like that. So you get your best revenge if you wait a long time. So you might have that kind of state of mind. So you might look like, yeah, that's okay. You crashed my car. Don't worry. Maybe you're planning something in the future. That's not necessarily non-hatred. So anger is a state of mind that is not really something that's able to act in a constructive way and really be resolute and make the best decision. You can, if in seeing something that's destructive, other people being harmed or yourself being harmed, you can still respond to that state of that situation with strength of mind and decisiveness, but without anger. Anger is what causes our mind to engage in activities that we later regret. Anger is a state of mind that actually creates negative karma, even burns up virtue. So non-hatred is a very useful state of mind to have. Upon recognizing one of these three things as the cause of our suffering, we tend to dislike the thing and subsequently become angry toward it. This anger immediately causes agitation and tension in the mind that leads only to irrational and uncontrolled behavior. Non-hatred is the opposite response. Without blindly reacting to the situation, it maintains a clarity of mind characterized by love, kindness, and patient acceptance. It is a positive mental factor that upon cultivation will eradicate the negative factors of anger and hatred. Attachment and hatred, these two the opposites of which that we just talked about, attachment and hatred are like boiling water in the mind. Detachment and non-hatred are similar to cold water, maybe actually cool water, that when poured into the boiling water has the function of calming and cooling the afflictions of attachment and hatred. So sometimes, is that a good analogy? Sometimes your mind is like boiling. Chris is not. Chris is very calm. Always very calm. I can't think of any of you. I have to think of myself. What?
You'll say, oh, I'm boiling at that person.
Yeah, I'm boiling, sizzling. So generating this particular mental factor of non-hatred at that point can kind of cool, cause the mind to calm down, not to be agitated. Also to develop non-attachment, actual antidote to attachment. That can cause the mind, even, you might be worried, say, whether you're going to get that last piece of cream cheesecake, You're sort of looking around. Is anyone else going to go for it? And if they are, you're going to try to get there first. With a sense of non-attachment, recognizing that even if you have that piece of cream cheesecake now, a couple hours from now, you won't even remember that pleasure, that all of the cream cheesecake that you've had in your numberless lifetimes up till now have not eradicated that desire for cream cheesecake. It hasn't quenched the thirst. So this is not going to quench, is not really going to be satisfying. Whatever method one uses to eradicate that can start to cause the mind to be in a calm state again. The third one, non-ignorance, or is perhaps, because the word is timug, which is similar to ignorance, it's moha in Sanskrit. I guess you have to translate, text translates it as non-bewilderment. Here, non-ignorance. The Abhidharma Samachaya says, what is non-ignorance? It is a knowledge arisen from fruition, scripture, and contemplation, or realization, and a wisdom of individual investigation. It has the function of acting as a support of the non-engagement in misconduct. As has been said, it is a wisdom of individual investigation that is able to serve as the antidote to ignorance arising from its cause, being either acquired through birth or arisen through application. So that's sounds a little bit technical, huh? Let's see, here there's some interesting facets of that, which may come in the discussion. Non-bewilderment, or non-ignorance, is a distinct mental factor that arises from either inborn disposition. What would that be? That's like innate, from imprints from past lives, from learning, reflection, or meditation. So just like we talk about wisdom arises, wisdom which is innate, wisdom arisen from hearing, contemplation, and wisdom, we also talk about non-bewilderment. But non-bewilderment is not exactly the mental factor wisdom. It acts as a remedy for ignorance and accomplishes the firm accompanies the firm intelligence, that is the wisdom, that thoroughly analyzes the true nature of objects. It accompanies wisdom. It itself is not wisdom. It has the function of preventing bewilderment, or ignorance is kind of ignorance, increasing the 4 types of intelligence. So non-bewilderment or non-ignorance has the function of increasing the 4 kinds of wisdom: innate, hearing, contemplation, and meditation, arisen from those. And it also has the function of acting as the empowering factor in the actualization of wholesome qualities pertaining to purification. Non-bewilderment is a clarity and sharpness of mind that dispels bewilderment about a particular object. Bewilderment is moha, or is here translated ignorance, but it's not exactly ignorance, is like the darkness in a room, and non-bewilderment is like the light that clears it away. It itself is not a form of intelligence, which in this text is translated as the translation of wisdom, sharab, prajna. It is not a form of intelligence. Remember, intelligence, you might say, well, intelligence, the mental factor intelligence or wisdom was one of the object ascertaining mental factors, and it could be virtuous or non-virtuous depending on the application. You might think, what this one is just the application of that to in a virtuous situation. It's not that mental factor. It is not a form of intelligence or wisdom, but is a lucid quality of mind accompanying the firm wisdom, the firm intelligence that bears a relationship of similarity with either enthusiasm or concentration. So what is this talking about? It is a lucid quality of mind accompanying the strong intelligence, firm intelligence that bears the 5 similarities with either concentration or enthusiastic perseverance. So remember, the enthusiastic perseverance we haven't talked about yet, but that is a virtuous mental factor. Concentration is virtuous or non-virtuous? Or neutral or what?
Neutral.
It is by its nature neither virtuous or non-virtuous. It's unpredicted. So this bears similarities. If those factors are present, enthusiastic perseverance, concentration, and is accompanied by wisdom, this kind of state, non-bewilderment, will be present. It bears a relationship of similarity with either enthusiasm or concentration. Most of us are born with a certain degree of non-bewilderment, inherited from previous wholesome activities. Nevertheless, for it to aid us in gaining liberation, it is a quality that needs to be heightened and developed firstly through learning and study. Learning here meaning what also we call hearing and study, and subsequently through reflection, contemplation, and meditation. It should be noted further that the terms detachment, non-hatred, and non-bewilderment do not denote a state of mind that simply lacks attachment, hatred, or bewilderment. The negative prefixes are not indicating a simple negation of those mental factors. Rather, they are denoting the converse remedial mental states for them. Here, there's a footnote. This is the Tibetan negative particles ma and me, as in ma chakpa, which they translate as non-attachment, and timu mepa and shirang mepa. They can denote one of 3 meanings. A simple negative, not this or not that, something other than what is stated, not that, not this, but that, or the converse or antithesis of what is stated, as we have here with detachment. So this is a case of that third meaning. Thus, detachment, non-hatred, and non-bewilderment are affirmative phenomena that have a wholesome remedial effect on the mind. All the teachings and advice that the Buddha gave have the sole aim of counteracting the unwholesome afflictions within the minds of his disciples. Hence, since attachment, hatred, and bewilderment are the principal source of all afflictions, their direct remedies of a detachment, non-hatred, and non-bewilderment become the very root of all that is wholesome. To the same degree in which they are cultivated and strengthened, a corresponding weakness is inflicted upon the afflictions. So if you want to get rid of the afflictions, these three roots of virtue, when we talk about faith, shame, and embarrassment, those are present in many virtuous states of mind, and that's what prevents us from engaging in non-virtue. Now these are states of mind that actually act as the remedies to these negative states. To the same degree in which they are cultivated and strengthened, a corresponding weakness is inflicted upon the afflictions. Thus, to develop them is the very heart of Buddhist practice. For those who genuinely strive for liberation, this is the path whereby to fully overcome the inner enemy. Yeah? So let's see, on page 38, maybe we can just go a little bit further here. There's the discussion. This, in our text, Yeshe Gelsen's text, at first he just gave very brief definitions. It didn't sound so much like it was talking about antidotes. It just said, it was seven. Just sounded like it was the lack of them. These three mental factors are like the root of all virtuous qualities. They're called the three virtuous roots, the three roots of virtues. A method for ceasing all misconduct, and they are the essence of all the paths. All paths and stages are for the sake of abandoning the three poisons as well as their imprints. So these are the opposites of the three poisons, because when we talk about the three poisons, we talk about attachment, hatred, and bewilderment. These are the antidotes to those three poisonous minds. So these are, all paths and stages are for the sake of abandoning the three poisons as well as their imprints, and all misconduct definitely arises from one of the three poisons. Aren't there some other, isn't some misconduct arise from something else? What about pride? Is that one of the three poisonous minds? Jealousy, depression. How can it make that statement? Everything arises from the three poisonous minds.
Wouldn't pride be a form of attachment?
Pride is, what do you think?
Secondary mental afflictions stem from those three poisons?
That could be true, but even there's 6 root delusions. Even you talk about the secondary. So in a sense, everything comes from the wrong view of conceiving reality in ourself, either the ignorance that conceives of a self a phenomena, or the ignorance that conceives of a self of persons. That's the root of everything. From that, these three poisonous minds arise. From those, everything else is kind of a subsidiary, sometimes a mixture, a little bit of 2 or 3 or one of them. Some of them, like, say, spite or grudge, are mainly just the delineation, an extension of hatred, say, or of anger. Some other ones might be a little, like jealousy is based on attachment for something and then feeling uncomfortable that someone else is getting it, right? So it's a little bit of a mixture of both. So the three, all of our negative actions can be, if we trace down, they can be traced down to these three poisonous minds. Hence their function, that is the function of the three roots of virtue, these three antidotes, is specified as, quote, acting as a support for effective restraint from misconduct. The divisions that are instances of these three mental factors are infinite, because taken extensively, all paths are subsumed within them. All the paths are included within them. So it's not as though there's just one mental factor, non-bewilderment, or not one mental factor, just one particular instance. It has many different varieties, non-attachment. Depends on the circumstance. Furthermore, regarding non-attachment to this life, non-attachment to this life, as an example, one's mind having turned away from this life to seek the purpose of future lives is the attitude of a being of small scope. When we talk about the Lan Rim, the individual of small scope has to develop this kind of detachment to the happiness of this lifetime. And on the basis of that, whatever kinds of circumstances arise here and now, they're not so concerned because they're thinking about the happiness of future lifetimes. So that state of mind that's focusing on the future lifetimes allows them to actually create the first kind of virtue. Because if you're only centered on the happiness of this lifetime alone, just your success and happiness now, there's no way it's said to create virtue. I want you to think on that one. What do you think? Lindy, is it? If you're only concerned about the happiness, aren't there some people who are creating virtue, even they're thinking about only the happiness of this lifetime?
Are you talking about non-contaminated virtue?
Yeah,
non-contaminated virtue.
No need to talk about uncontaminated virtue, even non-contaminated virtue. Can you create virtue, contaminated or non-contaminated? Say non-contaminated virtue. Can you create any kind of virtue if your intention is only to find the happiness of this lifetime? This is not there might be many people like that who don't have any sense of future lifetimes or what comes after this.
Yeah, some people find joy in benefiting others who don't believe in future lives.
The others don't believe in future lives?
No,
or the
people? Some philanthropists, for instance, who don't believe in reincarnation.
Or like Mother Teresa or something.
Right, but often there's an example. So these kinds of states of mind can arise for different reasons. One might be thinking about the experience after this life of heaven or hell. So one can restrain from, one is not thinking predominantly only of the happiness of this lifetime. One is thinking about the happiness of what comes after this lifetime. But then there are people who don't believe in anything after this lifetime. You just disappear, right? Can they create virtue? What do you think, John?
When you say create virtue, are you talking about creating virtue for yourself?
By virtue I mean virtuous karma that will ripen on your continuum in the future as happiness in future lives. Can you create virtue? Can you create the virtue to be born as a human again? There's something to contemplate.
And again, there's philanthropists who don't believe in anything, heaven or hell or anything.
So, do they create virtuous? So, what are the reasons that they're being philanthropists?
They might actually enjoy, God forbid, actually enjoy benefiting others.
Some people might be doing it for, we can think of different, you have to analyze. Some people, and even in our own experience, there might be experiences when we do something for reputation, become the most famous philanthropist in the world, or the giving, sometimes you may do it for tax reasons. Maybe a combination of both, It will help business. Your own business, the more you become philanthropist, the people like you, they'll buy your soap, they'll buy your coal, they'll buy your oil, your cars and stuff.
Well, what about just doing it for self-satisfaction?
So self-satisfaction right now.
Yeah.
How would you get self-satisfaction? Depends on how your self-satisfaction is. You have to analyze, again, in some cases it may be an imprint from past lives that you get satisfaction in the happiness of others. If that's the case, that's almost something similar, more than just a person of lower scope or intermediate scope. Might even be something similar to a person of high scope who finds satisfaction in others' happiness. A lot of people are not like that, though. We know in our own mind that we're not always like that. just because others will feel good about something, we're not going to do it. So it's something to investigate. Let's. This is really a really interesting section. So let's leave here and see if you can read this next section here, and the rest of the virtuous mental factors. We'll continue next time, and see if you can try to think this week about these different kinds of states. Whether, the example that Dorji has brought up about the philanthropist. What are the different reasons a person might practice what looks like to the world something virtuous? Is philanthropy necessarily virtuous?
It could be.
No.
If it brings happiness to others, is that a virtuous action?
Yes.
It's virtuous for them.
Depends on their motivation.
Say a person gives $1 million to the poor, but their motivating factor was to get a break on the tax, to be mentioned in a newspaper, all of these other things. That is not necessarily virtuous at all. So that's why I'm questioning what Dorji is saying. Almost we think, a philanthropist is necessarily virtuous. Virtuous actions are motivated by the mind, by the mental factor intention, and by the associated mental factors that are present. Just the action itself, let's say you might see someone making prostrations. Is that virtuous? Not necessarily. They might be thinking, oh, how many people are watching me? I've got more than Dorji. Dorji's only got 10,000. I've got 100,000. I'm going to be more than him. So it doesn't necessarily. It is not necessarily, just actions themselves are not necessarily virtuous or non-virtuous.
How do you explain the fly that circumambulates the stupa by going from pile to pile? One's not thinking about benefiting it.
Nice way of putting it, Frank. Pile to pile. Because there are some actions that create virtue merely by the power of the object.
Okay, so it's not the doer, it's the object.
In some cases, the power of the objects can even be so great as to create virtue even when our mind is distracted and so forth. So that's why it's good, even if you're doing prostration, say, unless you have good concentration and you'll never lose visualization, it's good to do the prostrations in front of images and consecrated images and so forth, so that even if your mind wanders by the power of the object, you'll still be creating virtue. But if you just imagine, you go outside and you're imagining the Buddha and you're making prostration, that can create virtue. But if your visualization disappears and you get distracted, you won't necessarily be creating the same strength of virtue in that way.
It's more important to have the mental, like you pay respect mentally, but maybe the visualization is not clear, but still you create.
That itself, if the state of respect or faith is there, even if the visualization is not clear, the visualization is not the main thing, but that the visualization can induce the state of faith. If there's a clear visualization, you can remain in that state of faith. But without the visualization, then also the state of faith might begin to disappear. Depends on the person. But you're right, that if you have a faithful state of mind, you can be creating virtue.
Also, I have another question. Because the virtuous mental factors, in some sense, they're also object ascertaining, right?
So you're Venerable saying that the virtuous mental factors are also, in a certain sense, object ascertaining? They're not classified as object ascertaining.
Yeah, but I mean, according to the definition of object ascertaining is.
They might be. They themselves are alert states of mind, but they're not classified as object ascertaining. Object ascertaining just have the quality of being present when an object is ascertained. When you have these mental factors, some object is being ascertained, but they're not called object ascertaining. Let's dedicate the merits, and we'll continue. This is a really good part of the course. So this evening we've created some virtuous karma because of the motivation that we had, actually created, depending on how much strength you put into the motivation at the beginning, we created varying degrees of virtue, which will ripen within cyclic existence or possibly beyond, can become a cause of liberation or enlightenment. But by the power of dedication, we can direct those, like turning the reins of a horse, and make it go in a particular direction. So through the mental factor aspiration, think, due to these virtuous karmas, may they ripen in such a way that I quickly attain the state of Buddhahood, enlightenment, for the sake of all living beings. And try to seal that dedication in the emptiness of the three spheres. The emptiness of the karma that we're imagining, dedicating the karmic seeds, the merit, the emptiness of the goal dedicated to, and the emptiness of the dedication itself.